to importing it from somewhere else around the world, that it gives us a competitive advantage. And it is good for economic growth and good for job creation. But could the Senator from North Dakota speak to that issue of jobs and what his understanding is in terms of the jobs that perhaps could be created if, in fact, we did move forward with the pipeline?
Madam President.
The Senator from North Dakota.
Thank you, Madam President. Absolutely. Look, this is a project, a $7.9 billion construction project that even by the State Department's estimates, now, so the administration's State Department has been working with a variety of agencies and has developed a number of environmental impact statements, and right in their own analysis, they indicate more than 40,000 jobs. So you're talking a project that costs billions to build, will create more than 40,000 jobs by their own admission, just in the construction process alone, that will generate hundreds of millions in tax revenue at the local, state, and federal level. So it has a huge economic impact at a time when we need to get people working and when we need to get our economy growing. And also at this time, I'd like to acknowledge that this is very much a bipartisan approach. It really is. Look, to get anything done, we got to be bipartisan. And so when we show a concurrent resolution from the Senate and the House, both houses of Congress together, and Republicans and Democrats coming together saying this is in the national interest, that's a powerful statement. And one I certainly hope that the President will acknowledge and make the same decision, that this project truly is in the national interest. And on that note, I'd like to turn to Senator Mary Landrieu, my esteemed colleague from Louisiana, who is also a prime sponsor of this resolution. And also, I see that Senator Begich from the great state of Alaska, Senator Heitkamp from my state of North Dakota, they're here as well, and I would like to acknowledge them and acknowledge their co-sponsorship of this legislation. If I could just read the sponsors that we have on board already, and there will be more, and then I would like to turn to the esteemed senator from Louisiana, who was so instrumental in crafting this resolution. But if I could just mention all of our sponsors, in addition to the senator from Louisiana, Senator Landrieu, and Senator Thune from South Dakota, also Senator McConnell from Kentucky, Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming, Senator Begich, as I mentioned, from Alaska, Senator Cornyn from Texas, Senator Blunt from Missouri, Senator Risch from Indiana, Senator Mark Pryor from Arkansas, and there will be others. I mention these senators both to thank them, but to make the point that this is very much a bipartisan effort, because we're serious about getting something done here. This is not about making a statement. This is about getting something done in a bipartisan way from the people's representatives across this great nation. If I could now, I'd like to turn to Senator Landrieu, the co-author of this resolution, and thank her for all her work on it.
Thank you, Madam President.
The Senator from Louisiana.
I am so proud to join a fairly large group of colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, to talk about the importance of energy for our country, domestic energy, and all facets of it, and particularly the Keystone Pipeline, which will transport oil primarily, but potentially gas as well, but oil right now, from an important part of the country to the refineries that can refine it so that our people can use it here and, as appropriate, exported as appropriately around the world. Canada is a very strong ally of ours. We have reduced our imports of oil because of the fallout of demand and the increased production domestically, but we can do more. But before I get into just my brief remarks, I see Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman on the floor, and I want to really commend them for bringing an energy bill to the floor, a conservation energy bill to the floor, that will not only make America more secure, but it has the potential to create literally millions of jobs in our country. the kinds of jobs that we want, that rely on cutting-edge science and technology and manufacturing here at home. It's hard to get a bill out of any committee with bipartisan support, and the chairman, Senator Wyden, has done a fabulous job, in my view, navigating between lots of very tough currents to get this bill to the floor. And it's disheartening that some people would come to the floor this morning to talk about health care or to talk about non-related issues to energy when this government needs to be focused on creating jobs, supporting the middle class, and growing the middle class. So I'm proud to be here talking about what most Americans want us to talk about, which is creating jobs at home, ending this recession, expanding our economy, and investing in good old American know-how about how to get things done. So I'm so happy to spend my time talking about something very positive. And that's the Keystone Pipeline. Well, I'm proud to be the lead sponsor on the Democratic side with Senator Hoeven and to be joined by the senator from Alaska and other senators on the floor, my friend Senator Heitkamp. So let me just say again, I would urge our amendment or our resolution, which we believe will have more than 60 votes, will urge the President and push us to a place where we can approve the Keystone Pipeline as an important infrastructure component to our efforts to greatly expand domestic production. There's horizontal drilling that's going on. There's fracking that can be done very safely and with a minimum environmental blueprint. There's some opportunities, as the chairman knows, to export gas. We are a big gas producer and consumer, so I understand the balance that's necessary. We most certainly don't want to export 100% of our production, but we do need to export enough to send the signal to the marketplace that if you risk your money to find it, you will have a market for it. And that is just the fundamentals of any kind of market, whether it's the cotton market, the oil market, or the gas market. They all operate the same. So we are excited about what's happening in America. From our view in Louisiana, this is one of the most exciting times we've had, Mr. Chairman, in decades, because there's so much interest in more domestic production. So many more jobs are being created. In Senator Heitkamp's state, I think they've run out of workers. I mean, I'm not even sure we can build their roads fast enough to help us get, this production underway. It is revitalizing the manufacturing base of America. All of my industries are excited. And I'm going to finally say this because there are others to talk. Just between Lafayette, Louisiana, Madam President, and Lake Charles, two medium-sized cities in South Louisiana, just the southern part of our state, there is currently $60 billion of investments being made today because of this extraordinary new domestic production. The Keystone is part of this. I know that there's some environmental concerns. I think they're unfounded. I think they have been disputed by any number of groups. What I am just here to say is this is about American jobs. This is about building our infrastructure in America for more domestic production. Let's get over this hump and let's get together as we can, focused on the things that matter to the American people, and not undermine this bill. I'm going to end with this. Not undermine this bill, which is important components, but to do what we can to get this Keystone Pipeline moving in a cooperative spirit, which is not often found on the floor these days. And so I want to just ask the senator from Alaska, what he's hearing in Alaska. He and I, if it's okay through the chair, to ask the senator from Alaska what he heard in Alaska, because I heard nothing but green light for Keystone when I was home in Louisiana, through the chair.
Thank you, Madam President.
The senator from Alaska.
Senator from Louisiana, thank you. It's always, we find ourselves always down the floor here on oil and gas issues, but our group has grown. We now have Senator Heitkamp here from North Dakota. We're very appreciative that she's here on these issues. It's interesting, Keystone, and I was hearing my colleagues on the other side, and this is one of those where, as Democrats and Republicans, we're focused on what is right for America. creating jobs and opportunity, not just having the partisan fights, but focused on what's important. When you think about energy overall, here's what I hear a lot back home. First, get us off of energy from countries that don't like us. First priority. We do a lot of business with countries who do not like us because we don't have our own production or we don't have capacity to tap into production. Second, of course, from Alaska, we are a huge producer of oil. I know my friends from North Dakota will tell me they've outranked us today. I will remind them that when the OCS opens up, the Outer Continental Shelf, we'll have a few, I don't know, 26+ billion barrels of oil, which we've already started in movement and production in the sense of exploration. We hope next year they get back into the OCS. We feel very confident about that. Alaska, like Louisiana, like North Dakota and Montana, others, are abundant with this resource, which will get us off of foreign oil. This is what I hear over and over and over again. And what a better deal but to work with our Canadian partners, where we import enormous amounts of oil from. Why not work with us?
Serves attention.
Why not work with a country that is unbelievably always there for us? A pipeline, and we know a little bit about pipelines in Alaska. We built a pretty large one going through some rough terrain, very environmental sensitive areas. It's been operating successfully for decades. And that is under the old rules of construction. So today, with the new engineering technology, the unbelievable potential to bring that resource to our refineries, because the choice isn't they're not going to do it. I think this is a false argument that you hear out there. People say, well, if we just stop this pipeline, they won't produce. No, Canada is a sovereign country. They have a resource they intend to utilize. This resource they will ship to us to refine or China. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a clear difference in environmental standards between China and the U.S. And oh, by the way, those jobs aren't our jobs in China. These jobs that would be produced by a project, a pipeline alone, I know there's people who discount, well, it's only a temporary project, it only has so many jobs. Well, first off, they have a labor agreement. Unbelievable when you think about it. Laborers, Teamsters, IBW, plumbers, pipe fitters, who will be trained and employed. And for North Dakota and Montana, a resource of oil being developed there, this creates access for their product, U.S. oil, to be able to be moved through the pipeline and then refined down south and in incredibly strict environmental standards. And yes, some might be exported, some might stay in the U.S., but at the end of the day, it's about creating American jobs. And from Alaska's perspective, people say, well, why are you for this if you want to do your own projects in Alaska? Because it's good for all of us. I want to see Chukchi Sea and Beaufort Sea in Alaska developed, and they're on their way. National Petroleum Reserve. We'll see the first production. I was up there 2 weeks ago with the Secretary of Interior and saw CD5, which is a platform being developed over the next 2 years, will produce that well alone 14,000 to 15,000 barrels a day. Just one well. They have plans for 2, 3 more. This is an incredible component, but Keystone is the safest way to move this. And oh, by the way, we already have oil coming from that tar sands through the Chicago region, about 500,000 barrels already. Now, unless I missed something, I didn't hear a lot of complaints on that. So this will up the capacity to 1.1. The southern section's being built. It is about American jobs, American resource. It's the right decision. I'm just somewhat perplexed by the administration's delay after delay after delay in arguments why somehow something else can't happen. In reality, this project is a good jobs project. It has a lot of opportunity, not only for us here in the U.S., in the sense of the lower 48 where I am today, sitting here in the chambers, but for Alaskans too, because the oil industry moves around. We have people working in the North Dakota region from Alaska. We have people down in Louisiana, and vice versa. It's a unified system of employment. It's good jobs, good jobs, good jobs. Did I mention that? And it's U.S. and Canadian partners who have been partners for years. And why we would not purchase this oil or work through this and build this pipeline to make sure this oil from our great partners refined in the U.S., rather than focusing on oil in countries that do not like us, makes no sense to me. So My friend from Louisiana, thank you for asking. I hear it all the time. And I know we've been joined, and as probably you are, very excited to have another person here on the floor with us talking about oil and gas issues. Sometimes we feel a little lonely here. But on this bill, this amendment, there's a lot of us. So I know my friend from North Dakota has a lot to say on this. I heard it during her campaign. And so I think she's probably going to emphasize. So I'll just turn, if it's okay, Senator from Louisiana, I'll ask my friend from North Dakota if she has some additional comments or what she's also hearing.
Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
I would just ask at this time to be able to propound a unanimous consent request with respect to Keystone.
Without objection.
Okay. Madam President, there's been a bit of confusion with respect to the handling of the Keystone because I was under the impression that we would be completed at this time the discussion of Keystone. So I would ask unanimous consent that at this time we would allow Senator Heitkamp to speak with respect to her position on Keystone. Then Senator Portman would go next. Both of them have indicated that they would be brief. And I would then ask for purposes of this part of the discussion that Senator Boxer and Senator Whitehouse be recognized for their views with respect to Keystone.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President,
The senator from North Dakota.
I thank the great senator from Oregon for clarification and for this opportunity to just very briefly speak on the significance of the Keystone Pipeline. We've been waiting 5 years. We fought a world war and defeated the Nazis in less time than what we've been waiting to have a determination on the Keystone Pipeline. And I know that there's a lot of discussion here and a lot of concern, and obviously this has gotten to be a national issue of some magnitude. But when you look overwhelmingly, the building of the Keystone Pipeline is supported by the American people. Why is that? Because it's good for our national security. And I think you heard how good it is for employment and job opportunities. But I want to just spend a moment and recognize that in this time that we are in right now, given the events of last week and early this week, the American public is looking for a way to allow us to express our national security interests without worrying about where our oil comes from. Now, I was fortunate enough during the August recess to go up to the oil sands in Alberta and spend some time with the Premier, spend some time with their environmental community, spend some time with their labor community and talk about the development there, talk about the enormous opportunities. You know, you take a look at Alberta and North Dakota, two of the fastest growing economies in the world because of this development. And if we walk away from this delivery system, very remote, very much need this pipeline in order to participate in this great North American energy independent opportunity that we have. I would just, I think as a final note, talk about the relationship that we have with Canada and the responsibility that we have to our largest trading partner, the responsibility that we have to one of our best and longest allies. In North Dakota, we celebrate that border with the Peace Garden, which is on both sides of the border, recognizing this is unheard of in the history of the world. This is not some rogue country that doesn't have environmental standards. They are adopting standards. They are doing everything that they can to deal with what they believe is their responsibility for global climate change, and they shake their head and wonder why it is that we are waiting 5 years down here to provide them with an opportunity to work with us to create a North America that's energy independent. And so I can't say enough how frustrating this issue has been, but I think how important it is that we have, again, a sense of the Senate, because we represent the people. We represent the majority opinion in this country who says, build the pipeline. And so with that, I yield my time.
Madam President.
The senator from Ohio.
Madam President, I appreciate the comments of my colleague from North Dakota and my other colleague from North Dakota who's been leading on this effort really over the past couple of years to try to get us to a point where we can have, as Senator Heitkamp just said, the views of the American people expressed here on the floor. So
although this is on the energy efficiency bill and this is more of a production issue, I do think it's consistent with the legislation. As we have talked about from the start, we need an all-of-the-above energy strategy. It has to include, in my view, efficiency as one of those key elements, but also producing more. And we've talked about the importance of producing more oil and gas in this country to make us less energy dependent on other countries where we are currently, unfortunately, dependent on volatile and dangerous parts of the world for energy, which affects the price at the pump and the spike in gasoline prices that we've seen. It also affects our economy. So I think this goes hand in hand, and as the senator from North Dakota knows, I'm a co-sponsor of his legislation that he's proposed before. I'd also supported the amendment on the budget resolution. I also would make a little argument here on efficiency, because one of the things that has been frustrating to me in this Keystone debate is that the discussion seems to be that somehow there would be more emissions and less efficiency if we were to allow the pipeline. I think just the opposite is true. This is oil which would come, as you know, from the oil sands in Canada, but it also comes from the Bakken in North Dakota and other places. And right now, most of that is being trucked or trained. And that is certainly not an efficient way to move oil and gas. And in fact, it's a more dangerous way to do it. And it's difficult for me to see how somehow there are efficiency gains by continuing the current policy rather than allowing this pipeline to be built, which will create tens of thousands of jobs, which is why the AFL-CIO Building Trades Council supports it. But also, it has efficiency improvements. Second, if we don't build the pipeline and cannot access oil from Canada, which helps us to become North American energy independent from an area of the world that is not volatile and dangerous, then that oil will be sold. As the senator from Alaska said, it's a sovereign country. They're going to figure out where a market is, and that market apparently is China. And our environmental standards in this country are, of course, at a higher level than they are in China. So in terms of the emissions issue and the environmental issues, obviously there would be an advantage to send it to our high-tech refineries on the Gulf Coast. But second, how will that oil get there? Not by pipeline, but by rail and by truck and ultimately by tanker. And certainly that is not a more efficient way to deliver that product, regardless of whether there were environmental standards at the end of that process, which of course there would not be at the level there would be in the United States of America. So I do think this is an important amendment. I do think it ties in to this overall strategy of having an all-of-the-above energy strategy. I do think that the way the senator from North Dakota has phrased this amendment, it gives us the opportunity to have our views be expressed, but also the House to have their views be expressed, and hopefully would result in the President of the United States making an important decision that's in the interest of economic growth, in the interest of good energy policy, as I said earlier, in the interest ultimately of efficiency and fewer emissions, not more emissions. So with that, with the understanding that we have a time agreement here, I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little about it. I appreciate the fact that the senator from North Dakota is also on the Energy Committee with me, also supported our energy efficiency bill, which is the underlying bill, also offered an amendment yesterday that we talked about that is a very important, I think, improvement in terms of the energy efficiency issue he offered with the senator from Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, and he has another amendment, as I understand, that deals directly with efficiency. So we appreciate working with him on that, and again, hopeful that we can resolve these unrelated issues, move forward with this energy efficiency legislation, and have votes on some of these energy issues. With that, I yield to my colleague from North Dakota.
Madam
The
President.
senator from North Dakota.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to express some thanks as we close out our colloquy, and I want to begin with the senator from Oregon, who is the chairman of the Energy Committee, as well as our ranking member, the senator from Alaska, Senator Wyden from Oregon, Senator Murkowski from Alaska. I want to thank them for working to get energy legislation to the floor and for the way they're working to be inclusive and bipartisan in this effort. I also want to thank Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman, Senator Portman from the great state of Ohio, Senator Shaheen from the great state of New Hampshire, for their bipartisanship in this energy efficiency bill, which truly creates efficiencies and is a natural piece of legislation for us to add this amendment to, as Senator Portman just described. Again, recognizing the time constraints, I just want to finish by thanking the senator from Louisiana, Senator Landrieu, for co-authorship of this legislation, and for all of the senators who have joined with us in this bipartisan interest on the Keystone XL pipeline, which we truly believe is in the national interest. And with that, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from California.
Madam President, I rise to talk about why approval of the Keystone XL pipeline is not in the national interest and why it places our nation's families at risk. There is a reason why it's taking a long time to get this approved. It's because it's very controversial, and there are some irrefutable facts that I think need to be laid on the table about this pipeline. I also want to say how discouraging it is to me to see a senator come here and offer an unrelated amendment that has to be seen, in my mind, as an attack on working people who happen to work for their country and try and derail this bill. It is wrong. And let's be clear, if a senator doesn't want to have health care here, take yourself out of it. If you don't think your staff deserves to have a health care benefit as an employer, you know what? Tell them they don't have to take it. Tell them to opt out. Tell them it would please you if they didn't have that benefit. But to see a good bill like this, shepherded by a great chairman, Ron Wyden, and two terrific senators here on this particular piece of legislation, Senators Shaheen and Portman, to see this bill get derailed because someone wants to attack working people is unfortunate, absolutely unfortunate. Now, let me just say, you know, one of my colleagues said, oh, this is all the people in America want the XL pipeline. I don't know, maybe in her state that's true. It's not true in my state, and it's not true in many states. As a matter of fact, that's why there have been 1.2 million comments to the State Department from various public agencies and private parties, from Native American tribes and others. And I think when the President said on June 25th, our national interest will be served only if this project does not significantly exacerbate the problem of carbon pollution, that he was speaking the truth. Now, you'd have to be asleep for 10, 15 years to not believe that carbon pollution is dangerous to the planet. And you know Senator Whitehouse will follow with his comments on this. But when you listen to the debate, I didn't hear one person say carbon pollution is a problem. Now, the Keystone XL would ship one of the dirtiest fuels on the planet through America's heartland and through critical water supplies. It will significantly increase carbon pollution, and the oil will be exported to other countries. So to stand here and say, not even address the issue of pollution and not even admit that most of this oil will be exported, I just don't think is a fair argument. Now, to put it into context, if the full range of products produced from tar sands crude oil, such as petroleum coke, is taken into account, EPA estimates that tar sands would create 30% more carbon pollution than domestic oil. 30% more. We'd see carbon pollution of over 18 million more metric tons, according to the State Department. Now, I'll close with this. Again, you'd have to be asleep if you didn't notice Superstorm Sandy and what it cost us, not only in lives and in damage, but in dollars. You'd have to be asleep if you haven't noticed that Yosemite National Park is close to burning. Thank the Lord God we have firefighters who are protecting it. The fire is still burning. You'd have to be asleep if you didn't notice what is happening to our oceans, to our economy. And we had just the other day a meeting of folks out there, from farmers to recreational industry people, who were saying their world is changing because of climate change. But yet you don't hear our colleagues talking about that. And they say, oh, there's no problem. Well, how about the fact that a Nebraska study found that Keystone XL is likely to have 91 major spills over its 50-year lifetime. And tar sands oil is very difficult to capture if the pipelines rupture. I'm going to ask unanimous consent to place the rest of my statement into the record, if I might.
Without objection.
And say that for all the talk about jobs, when you look at the permanent jobs, we're looking at 50 jobs. And what are the chances that there's going to be spills? What are the chances that we're going to hurt this planet? And what are the chances that if we were smart and we did what this underlying bill is doing, which is make sure we have incentives for alternatives that are clean, that are made in America, that work for us, there'll be many more jobs. That's the kind of alternative I want to see. Now, they may pass their amendment if we ever get to it, if they can stop this attack on our working people that is evident in an amendment that's been offered. But I got to tell you, I know there's a better way, and I'd like to see us make sure that we consider, when we say XL is great, all of the reasons why there's so much controversy surrounding it. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I'm very pleased to come to the floor today after my chairman on the Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Boxer, and offer an alternative point of view to that expressed by my distinguished colleagues who are supporting the Keystone XL pipeline. In my view, that pipeline takes us in the wrong direction from an energy point of view, and it supports the wrong kind of energy. And if you look at the growth of green and renewable energy, there is actually more jobs in clean, green, and renewable energy than there is in the oil industry. I had that question reviewed by PolitiFact, and I got a true on it. So the energy jobs of the future are going to be in clean, green, renewable, sustainable energy. And this takes us in exactly the wrong direction. Moreover, they're temporary jobs. I think the State Department put the number of final jobs produced by the Keystone Pipeline between 35 and 50. 35 and 50, not thousands, not tens of thousands, 35 and 50. So what you might as well do is actually go out there and build a pyramid and put tens of thousands of people to work stacking up a pyramid. And you'd actually do better because that pyramid wouldn't pollute. That is the kind of jobs that we're talking about. We would be far better off investing in clean, green, renewable, sustainable energy technologies and developing those markets, which are going to be the competitive markets in the future, rather than chasing the tail of fossil fuel technology. I believe, I didn't hear everybody speak the whole time. I had to come over from my office to the floor, and I missed that point, and I had to take a call, and I missed that point. But I believe I heard 7 senators speak, and I believe they spoke for 45 minutes. And I believe the words climate change and the words carbon pollution were never mentioned. We're going to pipe out the tar sands from Canada. We're going to add 18.7 million metric tons of additional carbon pollution. That's just from refining the tar sands. We're going to add another 3.5 million metric tons from the electricity required to heat and pump the stuff through the pipeline. The refining cost is the equivalent of 5 million cars out on the road that wouldn't otherwise be there. The electricity cost is another 600,000 cars out on the road that wouldn't otherwise be there. Mr. President, we just hit 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. For as long as the human species has existed on this planet, we've been in a window of 175 to 300 parts per million. It's been a long and successful run for Homo sapiens in that comfortable window of environmental protection. We're out of it. We're out of it for the first time in probably millions of years, at a minimum 800,000 years, more likely 3 million or more. And not out a little bit, not 301, not 315, 400 and climbing. This adds to that problem. It is irresponsible to discuss energy and refuse to discuss climate change, refuse to discuss carbon pollution. But for our friends on the other side, and from our friends from the coal and oil producing states, carbon pollution and climate change are the Lord Voldemorts of the discussion. It's he who must not be named. They're just going to ignore it, pretend it isn't there at all. That is wildly irresponsible in the environment that we are in right now as we see the effects of climate change occurring on our coasts, in our oceans, in acidification, to our fisheries, to our farms, to our forests. You really don't have to go very far in this country to find something that is being affected by the changes in our climate from our carbon pollution. And all of that for 50 long-term jobs. Really? I don't think that this is the good deal that our colleagues suggest. I'll close by saying two things. First, on energy independence, this pipeline connects to Port Arthur, Texas, a foreign trade free tax zone. That's where it's going to go, and then it's going to be shipped overseas to other countries. This isn't going to protect American energy independence. This is going to protect energy corporation profits. That's what's behind all of this. And the closing thing that I'd add is that we have a supplemental environmental impact statement coming from the State Department. You can believe the people who, for some reason, can't seem to get the phrase climate change or carbon pollution to come out of their mouths. Or you can believe me. You can believe whomever you want. But from a point of view of being fair to the process, we should probably wait until the State Department has concluded the supplemental environmental impact statement that they are now working on before we make too many rash decisions about polluting tar sands oil, investing in that dirty addition to our energy mix, and continuing to suck funding and support away from the energy sources of the future, which are the clean ones and the sustainable ones and the ones that aren't going to keep shoving the carbon dioxide concentration in our atmosphere up over and beyond where it is right now, 400, where it hasn't been in millions of years, where it hasn't been in the history of the human species. With that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
I would note that I'd like to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to stipulate that we be in a period of debate only until 2 o'clock. Ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you. And, Mr. President, I'm going to be very brief. I think that Senator Boxer and Senator Whitehouse have made a number of very important points with respect to this climate debate, and particularly that scientific finding that we're now at 400 parts per million. That ought to be a wake-up call to everyone with respect to the challenge of climate and carbon. And to just spend a couple of minutes, I was in North Dakota last week at the request of our colleague, our friend Senator Hoeven, and certainly there is a lot of common ground that can be found on this natural gas issue. And of course, natural gas is 50% cleaner than the other fossil fuels. It's been a real catalyst for the American manufacturing sector, with a lot of companies that have felt they had, for economic reasons, to do business overseas, to come back here in the United States. And of course, it has a direct connection to the expansion of green power, solar and wind and others, because it can be a key factor in making those energy sources a part of an embedded power system. So there are a lot of opportunities for common ground. For example, when I was with Senator Hoeven last week, we talked about, the way I would characterize it, a wide berth for the states with respect to regulating natural gas, because the geology differs from various, states. So when you look at these kinds of approaches, there's an opportunity for, common ground, and clearly this is a good set of challenges to have. We've got the natural gas, the world wants it, the pricing advantage is ours. This is a good set of challenges to have. I do think it's important to recognize that the debate about the pipeline has changed very significantly since it was originally proposed. And I'm particularly struck by the fact that you now have the CEO of the largest producer in the Bakken essentially saying that the pipeline isn't needed, and you have the CEO of the largest oil company in Canada saying that Keystone isn't needed. And let me just be very specific and use their words. Mr. President, last month, Harold Hamm, the CEO of the largest oil producer in the Bakken Shale Continental, said that the Keystone pipeline was not critical. Now, for anybody who's interested in the politics, Mr. Hamm isn't some flaming liberal. He was Mitt Romney's chief energy advisor. Just a few days ago, you had the CEO of Suncor, by some estimates, Canada's largest oil company, saying that the lack of a pipeline, in his words, has certainly not constrained his company's growth, and that his best estimate would be that it has not significantly constrained the rest of the market either. So you have here recently, Mr. President, the CEO of the largest producer in the Bakken saying that the pipeline is not needed. You have the CEO of the largest oil company in Canada saying essentially the same thing. That basically leaves only the refiners. It turns out they've been pretty much saying the same thing. The Wall Street Journal a few days ago had a story with a headline, U.S. refiners don't care if Keystone gets built. Valero, one of the largest refiners in the country, said Keystone was, in their words, not critical to their business. This is a refiner that signed up early to get oil from Keystone and spent billions upgrading their refineries in the Gulf to process it, and they now say it's not critical. So we're going to have further discussion about this. I want it understood that I think Senator Boxer and Senator Whitehouse have made some important points here. I'm particularly struck by how, as you get into this issue, there are significant questions about how this fundamentally benefits the American people. My hope is, and I've talked about this with senators on both sides of the aisle, that we can work out the various procedural questions with respect to how Keystone comes up here on the floor of the Senate. And in fact, I'm going to go spend about 45 minutes trying to be part of an effort to see if we can get some common ground so that we can get the issues that senators want addressed done promptly, done once, and then we can go to the energy efficiency legislation and have a vote up or down on the merits of that bill. Senator Portman is here. He and Senator Shaheen have done an excellent job, and frankly, they had done a good job of keeping this issue bipartisan in the interest of energy security, in the interest of creating more jobs and a cleaner environment. They'd done that before the bill arrived on the floor, and the bill has gotten better since it has gotten to the floor with the bipartisan amendments that colleagues have offered. So I appreciate that we are now in a period of debate only until 2 o'clock, and with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. And, Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I dispense with the quorum call and ask to engage in a colloquy with the senator from Mississippi for 5 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Wicker and I come to the floor to talk about a very important matter, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk about our amendment, which will update the current EISA statute to reflect the evolution of green building rating systems and create a more strategic approach for the federal government so that we have the highest performing, most efficient, and most cost-effective buildings. I'd like to ask Senator Wicker to go into a little bit more detail, and then I'll come back to some more information about our amendment that's pending.
Mr. President, I thank my
filed,
colleague
not
from
pending,
Louisiana.
that's been filed. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I thank my colleague from Louisiana and agree that this is a very important amendment because it addresses a number of issues that are important to American industries. In particular, the amendment specifies that the Department of Energy and the General Services Administration must allow the use of multiple green building rating systems for both commercial and residential buildings. We should avoid the situation where the federal government endorses one green buildings standard over others. DOE and GSA ought to support competition and allow the free market to produce the best energy-efficient buildings at the lowest cost. They also ought to support the use of domestically produced materials, such as sustainable wood and green technologies.
Mr. President, I agree with the senator from Mississippi. He and I have worked very, very closely together on the amendment that we are talking about today, and hopefully we will get a vote on it sometime in the near future. But I'm also concerned that many rating systems arbitrarily discriminate against domestically produced products based on arbitrary hazard without consideration for risk of exposure and supporting scientific data. Our amendment, and we've worked very carefully on this, will address this issue by requiring an ongoing review of private sector green building certification systems and allowing for the exclusion of portions of green building certification systems that are found to be discriminatory. This will not preclude efforts to exclude or reduce exposure to known environmental risks such as radon, formaldehyde, or volatile organic compounds. However, it will ensure that the risk of exposure is not ignored. This process will support competition among green building certification systems and encourage existing systems to revise portions of their systems that are determined to be discriminatory to domestic products. And let me just add, since many of these products that are in question come from Mississippi and Louisiana, as well as other states, that's what's engaged and piqued our interest in this.
Mr. President, the senator from Louisiana is exactly correct. And basically what we're saying is there's more than one way to get where we need to go when it comes to green buildings. This amendment is a step forward to ensure GSA and DOE green building policies are fair and effective. I also want to point out that this amendment requires the consideration of environmental impacts across the entire life cycle of a building material or product. By incorporating a life cycle assessment, this will ensure that the federal government is utilizing green building certification systems that are the most efficient. So I thank the senator from Louisiana, and I wholeheartedly endorse our amendment and call on our colleagues to vote for it.
Thank you. And Mr. President, let me just finally say that we believe that our amendment strengthens, not weakens, but strengthens the Energy Saving and Industrial Competitiveness Act as introduced by Senator Shaheen and Portman by encouraging improvements to green building rating systems and policies. I look forward to seeing this bipartisan legislation move forward, and it is in that spirit that our colloquy and our amendment is being offered. And I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Senate today has been working on an energy efficiency bill co-sponsored by New Hampshire Democrat Senator Jeanne Shaheen and Ohio Republican Rob Portman. It's aimed at helping manufacturers develop energy-efficient technologies for their businesses. Though the bill has attracted bipartisan support, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said Republicans are attempting to offer non-germane amendments to the bill. Here's some of what he had to say earlier today.
President, America has and has for so many years had the most brilliant and innovative and imaginative scientists in the world. Many of them work hard developing new environmentally friendly energy sources. That's one area that we have just been so good. Every year for the last many years, in August I host an energy summit in Las Vegas. We've had governors and presidents and all kinds of cabinet officers there. It's a bipartisan event. And one of the things we do there is recognize some of the smartest and most creative inventors and investors in the world to show their latest discoveries. There are lots of them all the time. This August I learned about an energy summit. I learned about an American company that's developing high-tech batteries, really great potential. They want to store solar power for use long after the sun goes down. I met the inventor of a flying wind turbine. It looks like a cross between a giant kite and a small plane. And on the Nevada-California border, just a few miles from Las Vegas, there's an amazing thing going on out there. They have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of solar panels, mirrors. And they have 3 very tall towers, look like skyscrapers. And they do it to harness the sun. The reason this work and this invention is so terrific is that one of the problems we found with solar energy, when the sun goes down, it's not producing energy anymore. This will no longer be the case. Because in these large, as I said, skyscrapers, they have molten salt stored in this. And during the day, it heats up. When the sun goes down, it still produces energy. Amazing. And that's 98% completed now. So I'm constantly amazed by the ingenuity of the clean energy industry, which has been a bright spot during the darkest of economic times. But Americans can't just rely on scientists and inventors to solve our energy dilemma and break our own reliance on polluting fossil fuels. We need to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That will mean reduce our energy consumption at home and at work. That's, Mr. President, what the Shaheen-Portman legislation is all about. Be more efficient. At home, we can start with small choices, replacing a burned-out light bulb with an energy-efficient one, buying more efficient appliances. They're out there. We can do that. Or installing a thermostat that turns the heat down or the air down when you're not at home. It can be regulated remotely. The effect of these choices and many more is real. But we need also to make the buildings we live in and work in, as well as technology inside these buildings, more efficient. What's happened for generations here in America, Mr. President, is that you put a building out, you give it the specs, and people come in and build it as cheaply as they can. No one is concerned about, at the time it's constructed, certainly construction company, they want to get it done quickly and as cheaply as possible. And the insulation is not good. The air conditioning equipment, the appliances in there are not as good as they could be. And so we need to make the buildings we work in, as well as the technology inside these buildings, more efficient. Much of the electricity created in America is wasted. As a boy growing up in rural Nevada like I did, just less than a mile from our home were these massive power lines coming from Boulder Dam, Hoover Dam, going to California, lots of them. And we used to always just be amazed. You could stand under them, you could hear that electricity popping and snapping. It was from Boulder City to LA. Think of all the electricity lost transmitting that electricity down there. So much of electricity that we use in America today is wasted. Just heating and cooling our homes and offices with outdated technology is one way we waste so much electricity. This legislation before the Senate will spur the use of energy efficiency technologies. Here's what Shaheen and Portman named this legislation: the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act. That's what it's called. It'll spur the use of energy efficiency technologies in private homes, commercial buildings, as well as in the industrial sector, all at no cost to taxpayers. So I commend Shaheen and Portman for their persistence and dedication in bringing this bill to the floor. I thank Chairman Wyden, Chairman of the full committee, and Ranking Member Murkowski for their able management of this measure. Investing in energy efficiency is one of the fastest and most effective ways to grow our economy. This legislation will make our country more energy independent and protect our environment, but will also save consumers and taxpayers money by lowering their energy bills. This measure, it's estimated, would save American families today $14 billion per year, and will create more than 150,000 new jobs, according to some of the studies surrounding this legislation. This bipartisan bill makes it easier for the private sector to adopt efficient technology, and by 2030, that's real close, Mr. President, even as a young man presiding, you understand how quickly 2030 will get here. This legislation will reduce America's CO2 emissions as much as taking nearly 17 million cars off the road. The bill creates incentives for companies to use technology already available right off the shelf, technology that can be used in every state in the nation, and will pay for itself right away through savings in energy. The federal government also has an important role to play in saving energy, and we haven't done very well in the past. Federal government's important since it's the nation's single largest user of consumer electricity. No one is a bigger customer for electricity in America today than the federal government. Reducing the government's energy use will not only be good for the environment, it will save taxpayers lots of money. I am aware that senators wish to offer amendments. I've been told by Senator Shaheen that there's 18 bipartisan amendments to be offered. So I look forward to work with them and with the bill managers to help American businesses and consumers play an active role in reducing our nation's energy consumption. Because while some of the answers to America's energy dilemma will come from inventors and researchers, others must begin in the place we live and work. Now, Mr. President, a lot of happy talk about what a great piece of legislation this is, and it is. But even though I've worked with Senator Shaheen and Senator Portman, there will be no amendments. We got them all. We got all bipartisan amendments. Of course, we're diverted totally from what this bill is all about. Why? Why, Mr. President? Because the anarchists have taken over. They've taken over the House. Now they're here in the Senate. The Speaker couldn't pass a simple CR today. When asked at a press event yesterday, as I was reported to me on the news today, they said, "What's next?" He said, "You have a couple ideas? Give them to me. They'll be shot down also." We're in a position here where people who don't believe in government, and that's what the Tea Party's all about, are winning. That's a shame. There's not been a single amendment allowed to be offered in this legislation that has anything dealing with energy. Oh, all kinds of different issues. Defund Obamacare. And I guess that's the new, as the fiscal year comes to an end, I guess that's what it's all about. You do what we want to get rid of Obamacare, or we're not going to fund the government. Mr. President, the President of the United States has said he is not going to negotiate dealing with the debt ceiling. If the Republicans in the House can't pass a simple funding resolution for a short time, then it'll shut down because of that. Government can't fund unless we have activity here. So even though I gave all the reason why we need to do this energy bill, and Senator Shaheen and Portman have been talking to me for months and months, let's do this bill. Well, there won't be amendments on it unless they relate to energy, so here we are. Where are we? Where we have been this whole year. And what have we accomplished? Not much, Mr. President.
The Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, earlier today with remarks at the beginning of today's session on energy efficiency and a number of other items. That was, again, at the beginning of today's session. Also, energy efficiency is the pending business in the Senate today. We'll now hear from Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who spoke shortly after the Majority Leader.
Over the past several weeks at meetings and events all across Kentucky, last week I participated in my 51st hospital town hall since 2011. And I'll tell you, one theme kept emerging over and over and over. Kentuckians are really, really worried about Obamacare. They've read the same stories we have about businesses being forced to cut hours and eliminate health care, about people being laid off. They've read about how the rollout of this massive law is becoming a massive mess, and how their personal information could be compromised by scam artists. Now, I know that there's still some of you who supported the law who are thinking, well, they'll learn to like it. But it's precisely the kind of, we know what's good for you attitude that's so upsetting to my constituents. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. So let's at least get this much straight. The doctors, the nurses, the health care professionals, the patients, and everyday Kentuckians I've been speaking with on this issue are not ignorant of the facts. They know what they're talking about. A lot of them know more about health care than those who voted for this law ever will. And the fact is, the more my constituents seem to know about Obamacare, the more worried they tend to be. That's true for the business owners, too. One small business owner in Murray wrote to me she's looking at premium increases of nearly 90%. Premium increases of 90%. I think she summed up the situation pretty well. She wrote, government is crippling the businesses that are keeping this country going. Another constituent wrote to me to say that as a matter of conscience, he doesn't want to let his employees go uninsured, but that realistically he may no longer have a choice. No longer have a choice. One of Kentucky's biggest employers recently announced plans to stop providing health care to spouses of 15,000 of its employees, also due in part to Obamacare, part of a growing trend across America. These are just some of the human costs of this law, and it hasn't even fully come online yet. So it's small consolation for business owners in my state that they'll have little more time to work through this mess after the President's decision to delay the so-called employer mandate for a year. They got a reprieve for a year. The mess comes along just a year later. Interestingly enough, just yesterday, the country's largest union federation, the AFL-CIO, outlined serious flaws in Obamacare that could hurt its members, too. Apparently, they came very close to calling for outright repeal. This is the AFL-CIO, Mr. President, came this close to calling for outright repeal. News reports suggest that a lot of harsh words were said. I don't think I can even quote all of it out here on the floor. But one union leader implied that Obamacare could lead to the Federation losing three-quarters of its membership in just the next few years. This is the AFL-CIO, the biggest supporter the President had, coming this close to calling for outright repeal. So we know big labor is leaning on the President. We know they want him to let them rewrite the same law they helped ram through, and apparently he's listening to them. But what about everybody else? It's not in big labor. What about the single mom in Bowling Green who won't be able to cover rent and her hours are in fact cut, as she anticipates they will be? What about the recent college graduate in Louisville who's barely scraping by as it is and who won't be able to afford a premium increase? What about the families from Covington to Paducah who are worried sick about this law? Doesn't the administration think those folks deserve some relief too? The same kind of delay, at least, that businesses will get? Well, Republicans do, That's why the Republican-led House of Representatives passed the bill on a bipartisan basis. That means Democrats voted for it, too, before the August recess to do just that. Last month, I tried to pass that same bill here in the Senate, but the Washington Democratic leadership blocked it, and I'm not sure why. This legislation is just common sense. It's the fair thing, the right thing to do. So today I'm going to try again. Yesterday, I, along with a number of my colleagues, filed an amendment to the Portman-Shaheen bill that would provide the same reprieve for individuals that the administration has already offered to businesses. This time, I hope my colleagues on the other side will join me in supporting it, as a number of Democrats did over in the House. I know they all got an earful when they were home last month, so maybe they've reconsidered the wisdom and fairness of their earlier position. Maybe now they'll think that individuals and families should be treated no differently than businesses when it comes to protecting them from Obamacare. This same legislation, as I indicated, attracted votes from both Republicans and Democrats in the House, and there's no reason for blocking it here in the Senate. We need to pass a one-year delay. A one-year delay of Obamacare for everyone. That's what the amendment I've filed would do. And then enact what Kentuckians and Americans really need, a full repeal of this job-killing mess of a law. Job-killing mess of a law, that's what it is, and just what I intend to keep fighting for. As I said earlier, union members that pushed for this bill are now turning against it in droves. So are businesses, and so are our constituents. I don't care what party you're in, you're hearing from them. So let's take this first step together. Let's delay Obamacare mandates for families right now, just like the White House did for businesses, while there's still time to do it. And then let's work together, Democrats and Republicans, to repeal the law for good and replace it with the kind of common sense, step-by-step reforms that will actually lower costs. Actually lower costs. That's what Kentuckians want. That's what Americans want. And anybody who actually listened to their constituents last month already knows what I just said. Mr. President, I yield the floor.